Oh, God. Here we go. Woo. Yep. This is our last one for the year. Did you know that?
Yeah.
I'm sure you did. So much fun speaking with you, Maya. I know you love it when I'm dancing.
I saw that. Good morning, Timothy, and good morning, everybody who is watching Japanese Politics One-on-One, episode 255, where we talk about the latest events in Japanese politics, what happened during the week, of course, with the political parties in Japan and with the economy and some other news. So, Timothy, thank you very much for being with us this morning. And once again, welcome to the studio. I know that you are very impatient to be here.
As usual, Maya, thank you very much. And good morning, everybody. This is our 255th episode, Maya, our 52nd episode for this year. That means every weekend this year, we have had a broadcast on what's going on in Japanese politics for you, our audience. And we really appreciate you sticking with us. And for those of you who are new here, we also produce a synopsis on this, but we talk about what's going on in Japanese politics. So to keep you up to date and also to anticipate what's going on, it's been a very active week, Maya. You've been following it too with me. The Diet closed down 2 weeks ago, and this last week, oh my God, what a flurry of activity. But this is our final briefing for the year, and I just want to say thank you to everybody. And as we close out 2025, I want to step back slightly today, and rather than just talk about the headlines, I want to have a discussion about where Japan stands and what forces are shaping the country right now, and what is the near-term lookout as we head into the year of the horse. That's this next year. And so I'll touch on politics, the economy, defense, and geopolitics. A new budget was proposed. The cabinet proposed the budget on Friday. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and what that kind of tells us about where Japan is going. Also, some polls came out on Ms. Takaichi and how she's doing and what policy
approve of or they like, and what are not kind of working with the general population, and we'll go into that. And where does Japan actually make its money? I want to talk about the economy and about how Japan is standing geopolitically with other G20 and G7 countries, and what is the foundation of where Japan's wealth is, because that helps us understand a little bit better. And I think for all of the people who are on this program, we're all rather familiar with what's going on economically and what the support is with Japan. But Japan has moved drastically over the last 15 years. And as we have a new prime minister and a new policy, and the LDP and the factions have kind of diminished, we're moving into a completely new area, and I'd like to talk about that. So let me get into the politics first and what's going on with the prime minister, and then roll into some of those other issues, and then we'll close it up for some Q&A, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes, and to everybody watching us, please remember to let us know that you have been here by, following us or subscribing, or letting us also know that, you letting us know your thoughts and comments. Also questions, because after Timothy finishes the briefing, we are going to have a Q&A session, and I will read out comments and questions, of course, to him, because here I can get these questions in the studio, most of them, not every one of them, of course. But also, please remember that there is a time lag between the time you post the comment or question and the time I get it here in the studio. So please allow me if I'm a little bit late to read them out. And of course, here is Timothy once again. Timothy, welcome back. And yes, it's your time now.
Where did we get cut off?
Just when I started doing the housekeeping.
Gosh, every week.
Yeah.
I don't know why that glitches. So yeah, I think I should sign up for Starlink, because I'm not sure if it's the Wi-Fi or whether it's the platform that we're using, but let's try and fix that. Anyway, getting on to Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi.
Oh, right. Yes, please. Because
okay, thank you very much. So she ends the year remarkably strong. She's only been in the position 2 months now, Maya, and she's closing up the year in a very favorable position. There have been polls over the last 2 weeks that talk about the prime minister, how she's doing, what policy she's pursuing. She wants to be a fiscally responsible prime minister, but she passed a supplemental budget that was just outrageously huge. And then we closed out the year on Friday with another budget proposal that the Diet will be pursuing once it comes back into session. So the polling over the past 10 days show her approval rating at around 70%. So when she first started out, you'll remember it was around 65, 66%. Then it dipped a little bit. We had a little bit of the China remark kerfuffle and a little bit of back and forth with Ishin. It dipped a little bit, but right now she's closing up the year at around 70%, which is incredibly strong. Disapproval is very low at about 20%. And it's not just good by Japanese standards, it is exceptional by global standards. And this is why it matters and why she is so popular. Voters cite policy clarity and decisiveness, not so much personality as you might expect because she's a woman and she's the first woman. But, you know, when you step back and you take a look at what her pronouncements are, how she's handled the China thing, it's very, it's nice. It's kind of different than what we've been treated to before. And the support for the supplemental budget that she passed is very strong too. Her stance on China and national security polls, even well among voters who worry about economic fallout and when the tourists aren't going to come in and they're not buying our fruit or our fish, still people are still very supportive of her. And politically, we're seeing a quiet but important realignment. You might have followed this last week or 2 weeks ago. Ishin and LDP were tied together, and then at when the Diet ended, she kind of became very friendly with the Democratic Party for the People. Mike, can you turn off your mic, please? I can hear you strangling your cat.
Yes, I apologize for that.
Well, it's kind of a nice background sound, but so the LDP has drifted closer to Tamaki Yuichiro and the Democratic Party for the People, particularly on tax policy. So you'll remember at the end of the year, the Diet closed and Tamaki came up, and she and Mr. Tamaki had their pictures taken because she had accepted his proposal to raise the non-tax salaries from one position to another position, thereby capturing a lot of people who are kind of in the lower economic rung for not paying taxes, except for that exceeds that taxable ceiling. And that has actually scored very well among voters throughout the country, strangely enough. And so the Democratic Party for the People and Mr. Tamaki, their star has risen. Ishin is a little bit kind of worried about that because they thought that they were the person bringing the prime minister to the dance. And now you've got Tamaki, who is always kind of coming in and stealing the limelight. He's done it again. So the decision to raise the non-taxable income ceiling has proven extremely popular, and it's undercut Ishin's leverage. Ishin ends the year having failed to deliver its two marquee demands. A seat reduction, remember it was 10% seat reduction, promise us, LDP, and then we'll come into bed with you. And LDP promised, but they didn't perform for a lot of different reasons. If you've been following the show, then you know why. And the other promise was, we want Osaka to be the second capital city. And that momentum still exists, but it really didn't crystallize at the last Diet. So it doesn't mean that Ishin has disappeared, but it does mean that the LDP now has different options. It's got a little bit more flexibility than it had when she became prime minister, and it reduces her vulnerability too. Komeito, on the other hand, used to be the alliance partner with the LDP for 26 years. It's shown signs of pragmatism over purity. So the voting with the government on key policy issues, it now is leaning towards. In the past, it has opposed. So it was in alliance with the LDP. It kind of held its nose and voted along with the LDP on some issues, but it stuck to its guns on others, thereby hamstringing the LDP. They left the alliance just recently, a couple of months ago, and now the LDP is more free to practice what it really wants to pursue, and it's going full steam ahead. And I think Komeito is seeing that and reading the tea leaves and thinking to itself, if we don't get back on board when it comes time for an election, we're going to be out of luck. So no one wants to be blamed for instability, particularly Komeito. So going into 2026, you can see that Komeito is looking at Ishin and the Democratic Party for the People, the LDP, how they're going. They're kind of wondering if it was a seller's remorse, and so a lot is open. A snap election, it's possible, but they're not going to have a snap election. The Diet has decided, the cabinet has decided that they will open the House on the 26th of January. So had they announced that they're going to open in the early part of January, then that's going to create the scenario. It's going to make the scenario possible for having a snap election. Now that they've pushed it towards the end of January, you can kind of calculate that it's a regular Diet session. They're going to be talking about the budget, and they really don't need to gamble about a snap election. It doesn't look like it's going to be in the cards. So all eyes were waiting for what the date was for the start of the new Diet session. And now that it's going to be later in the month, we can all relax and understand that there's not going to be a coalition of people against the prime minister. She's too strong now, so it's an unwise decision. She and the cabinet have read that, and so they say, it's easier. We don't want to have a snap election either. There's no excuse for us to have that and having the population buy it, that we're having an election just to substantiate the LDP's position. So there are other things that are going on. The supplemental budget that was passed at the end of the extraordinary session is enormous, 18 trillion yen. And it's intentional to be so huge. It's focused on AI and advanced computing, defense and dual use technology, energy resilience, and industrial security. This isn't a short-term stimulus in the old sense. It's a strategic spending. So spend now, generate income, stabilize the economy, and build for a better future. That is what this was strategically built for. So it does have its critics, particularly among the fiscal hawks, because they're saying, you said you're going to be the prime minister who's fiscally responsible, and yet you're spending so much money. But the public is largely backing it. Second, the 2026 draft budget, it was submitted on Friday, looks like the direction of the government is going to much higher defense spending, continued industrial policy, and the willingness to tolerate higher debt if it supports growth capacity. And and you can read a lot into that, but that looks like the direction that the government is going. And this is why bond yields have risen and why markets are watching Tokyo carefully, which brings us to the Bank of Japan. So the Bank of Japan raised its policy rates just 2 weeks ago. And even though they did that, the yen weakened, closing the week around 157.5 just on Friday. So this confuses people, but the explanation is really straightforward. Markets are not doubting the Bank of Japan's resolve. They're questioning fiscal discipline over medium term. And so they're reacting to the capital flows, not the sentiment of what's going on with the yen, how that is complicating, values that are coming in or flowing out of the country. And a rate hike alone can't strengthen a currency when the investment money continues to flow overseas. So investment of Japan, the money that is being generated, is actually going overseas rather than being reinvested here. So the problem with Japan is it remains a net importer of energy, and that's where a lot of the value, that's where a lot of the income that is being generated is going. It must buy foreign energy. And that's another reason why the restart of the nuclear reactors, there's been some news on that. There was a opposition to starting the Kashiwaki nuclear reactor. The court shut that down. They said it can go forward. So Japan getting back on the nuclear bandwagon, generating energy internally rather than purchasing it, is a high demand for this administration. And the global yields remain higher elsewhere than in Japan. So when the United States is strong, the money flows there. And when the United States begins to have some problems or weaken, rather than investing in the dollar, the money comes to Japan because it's stable, the politics are stable, the economy is rather firm, and so the money comes into Japan. So the weakness of the yen currently just indicates the United States is kind of on the upswing. Japan hasn't quite stabilized its economy yet, but it looks like it's going there. The government's been very careful with the language, warning against excessive volatility while avoiding rash intervention. So there's been some discussion about that. You might remember that if the yen goes to 158, we're at 157.5. If the yen goes to 158, the Bank of Japan needs to come in. The finance ministry needs to purchase massive amounts of yen, trillions of yen worth of yen they need to purchase in order to support it. That kind of discussion is really being downplayed. And this tells us that they understand that this is structural and not speculative. So the speculative market, the speculative kind of action of the markets is really being downplayed by the government. And for households, this shows up once again. We've got higher food costs and energy costs, rising prices for digital subscriptions and imported services, which a lot of that comes into this economy, and continued pressure on real wages despite progress. And for exporters and tourism, wow, this is a windfall. The weak yen remains a tailwind, and that tension will continue to define 2026, in my opinion. So regionally, the geopolitics, defense, and Japan's trajectory for 2026, it's been pretty active recently, and it's probably going to continue to be that because China doesn't like Japan kind of asserting itself and telling people that, you know, it's a volatile market. They want people to think China is just doing business as usual. But you know, if you look at the signature moves, China and Russia flights, bomber flights in joint cooperation, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, that really was surprising and rather testy. So they were deliberate probes, and they're testing response times and signaling displeasure with Japan's trajectory. North Korea remains active, unpredictable, and rhetorically escalatory, particularly in response to Japan's defense spending and missile defense posture. They just announced this last week, you might chuckle at this, there was a kind of a trial balloon, the Ministry of, somebody in the Prime Minister's office in the, not for retribution or he didn't identify himself, said that Japan needs to possess nuclear weapons. It was a trial balloon, and it generated a lot of response, particularly from North Korea. North Korea put its foot down and said, without fail, Japan must not possess a nuclear weapon. So that's kind of a funny comment coming from North Korea. So in light of that, Japan's response has been calm but firm. It continues with its alliance coordination, a quiet expansion of defense export flexibility. You've been noticing that Japan is moving more towards defense exports, military armaments that possess not just defensive but offensive capabilities as well, and investment in deterrence rather than in provocation. So part of the defense budget allocation is for drones and for underwater drones, for surveillance, that sort of thing. So it's not so much building an army because, I mean, let's face it, Japan is not going to possess much of an army. The recruitment numbers are down. People don't want to become soldiers. The Constitution kind of describes the Japanese sentiment to be a peaceful and not a warlike country. It's not going to return to that. So there might be some provocations that push it in that direction, but we can get into that later in the Q&A period. But there are some things that Japan is going to promote, and I think it's going to be defense capabilities and also increasing armament exports. It's got to build its economy at the same time that it needs to assert its own defense of its territories. And I think that that is going to be the signature kind of characteristic of Japan moving forward. And although the nuclear taboo still exists, the debate continues to evolve. And that's on two different fronts. One is development of nuclear capacity, nuclear energy here in Japan, and I think that's going to be moving forward more and more rapidly. Japan has suffered economically over the last 20 years, and the triple disaster with the tsunami and the nuclear meltdown and the earthquake. We're beginning to emerge from that, and I think nuclear power really is a place that Japan is going to go. And then it's the issue of holding nuclear weapons. In order to do that, it's a long-term discussion. You need to change the constitution to have that. It's violative of the three principles of Japan defense strategy, so that needs to be changed too. But I think these taboos are beginning to undergo a rethink, and you've got a new prime minister who is more on the right-hand side of the political spectrum, and I think she's going to be, she's got long legs. I think she's going to stay through the issue of having a snap election and maybe the LDP coming back or maybe losing more seats. That is a thing of the past. We're not going to visit that until after the Diet passes the budget on April 1st. So between now and then, I think it'll be rather cold. But the shift is being watched very closely by Beijing, Pyongyang, and Washington, D.C. So Japan is beginning to emerge. It's beginning to define its own character. So once the Diet convenes on January 24th, the clock starts. So typically the budget, they produce the draft budget on Friday. That draft goes into the lower house and also the upper house, but the big deal is the lower house. The lower house chews it up, it debates it, it tries to modify it, but it's a huge budget. And they need to pass it to the upper house with 1 month to consider it. So that gives the lower house maybe 6 weeks to mash through the budget. They pass it to the upper house, and the upper house has 1 month constitutionally to consider it and pass it. And if it doesn't pass it, then it falls back to the lower house, and the lower house gets to decide on it. So it's one of those issues in Japanese politics where, once again, the lower house is showing its major primacy in Japanese politics. With regard to a budget that is passed every year on April 1st, the lower house, if the upper house doesn't pass it, the lower house gets a second bite, and it passes based on the lower house vote. So April 1st is a hard deadline, and until that budget passes, political stability will be protected. LDP, Ishin, Democratic Party for the People. Komeito is kind of circling, wondering what it's going to be doing. There will be election calculations because the LDP, once again, doesn't really want to have an alliance with anybody. It prefers to have a majority all by itself. I don't know if it can do that. The faction system is completely dead. There's only one political faction that exists, Mr. Taro Aso's. He Am I still with you, Maya?
You are, yes.
Okay, thank you. So the possibility of a manufactured crisis to kind of trigger some event, it's always there. You can't have a snap election. You can't really manage things without some kind of activant. So a scandal or some kind of international incident could be a possible trigger point. But right now, we just don't see anything like that. I think until the budget passes on April 1st, it's going to be pretty much business as usual. And I think continually you'll see Ms. Takaichi making inroads, but also being kind of attacked from different quarters if she maybe oversteps her grounds, or she's pushing too hard on defense or on kind of the offensive weaponry that is going to be exported and building that military industrial complex. So in closing up today, I'd like to just talk a little bit about what is the real driver of Japan's economy. So it used to be Japan was primarily a country that makes things and exports them. That was the creation of the Japanese bubble. And that world is no longer existing here in Japan. And for the last 20 years, the Japanese economy has just continued to get weaker and weaker. So currently, there are 4 channels that support where Japan makes money. Services is number one. Finance, logistics, real estate, healthcare, and IT is the major driver, the major pillar that drives the Japanese economy. It is not manufacturing. Number two is high-end manufacturing, which is precision components, materials, and machinery. Third is overseas investment income. This is huge. This is money that Japanese companies, the government has invested overseas, and it produces dividends. This is enormous. This is far higher than the export trade that Japan produces. And tourism, we talk about tourism all the time, but it happens to be one of the main pillars that generates wealth in this country. So it's understood as a kind of an export market. It's qualified as an export industry, but it's where a lot of money comes in. It doesn't cost a lot for Japan to encourage more tourism, and Japan is one of the hottest tourism spots in the world. China knows that and knows that the economy depends a lot on Chinese tourists, and they've removed that. They've canceled 41 flights that come to Japan weekly, and that does make a difference. But with COVID, after COVID, China never eclipsed 50% of the tourism market as it did before COVID. It kind of played in the 34 to 40%, excuse me, range. But now it's going to diminish. But still, Japan remains a tourist destination for the entire world. And income earned abroad is Japan's largest source of income. Most of that comes from the United States, by far the largest source, for manufacturing profits, from finance, from tech and infrastructure, and hundreds of billions of dollars in Japanese assets in the United States. They develop a revenue. Some of that is repatriated. So that's a huge amount of money that Japan makes annually. China is still significant as a source of generating wealth for Japan. It's politically risky, but it's mostly based in manufacturing, retail, finance, and royalties. Number three is the United Kingdom in financial services, insurance, and investment vehicles. And so far, most of what I've been talking about are services. They're not hardcore export. They're not products that are being made in Japan. Australia is number four with energy, resources, and infrastructure. The Netherlands, strangely enough, is huge for Japan. IP routing, finance, and corporate holdings in Singapore. Number six, regional headquarters, finance, and logistics. Thailand is at number seven with manufacturing bases and regional supply chains. So Japan now earns more money from overseas investment income than from its trade surplus, and it's done so for many years. This is really different from what, for most of us in Japan hands who have been doing this for 20 years, it's a little bit different than MITI as the engine of growth and decides how things work in Japan. That used to be the old model. But Japan can tolerate a weaker yen because of this. Higher imports and slower population growth make Japan kind of a capital owing economy, not a factory economy. And this is why the government is so focused on AI, semiconductors, defense technology, and energy security. And you see that in the budget proposal, and you see that in the supplemental budget that was passed. And that's because these are systems that generate future value, not just future jobs. So the population is declining, so future jobs are not as important as generating sustained, substantive future value. So I think this is our final briefing for the year, and just the rhythm, the political, the economic, and the cultural things that impact what's going on in the Japanese economy. We talk about Japanese politics because it's kind of at the pinnacle of that, but everything kind of flows out of a discussion of Japanese politics. Sometimes it's not immediate, but it's forward looking, but it does help explain a lot about what's going on. And if you're following Japanese economy, if you live in Japan, if you're doing business with Japan, this is pretty important. But culturally, right now, you'll remember that the emperor abdicated and his son became emperor. So the former emperor's birthday was just 2 days before Christmas. This used to be a national holiday. Since he abdicated and his son became the emperor, his son's birthday is now a national holiday. So December 23rd, a lot of people still feel, because for such a long period of time, excuse me, for such a long period of time, December 23rd was a national holiday because it was the emperor's birthday. So people, you might have noticed this, people did feel a little bit nostalgic about December 23rd and maybe being kind of a day off or a national holiday. You do sense it, but now the new national holiday for the emperor is February 23rd, I believe. And so the emperor, the former emperor, turned 92 just a week ago. And so Japan produces maybe 16 national holidays a year. And these are structured not by happenstance, as you might think. National holidays, you have Thanksgiving, you have, these national holidays, Labor Day. Japan has 16 national holidays, and they're structured so that about more than half of them fall into a 3-day weekend. That helps generate the economy, helps people go travel, go out and have dinner and do things. And sometimes it goes into a 4-day weekend over Golden Week or maybe Obon Yasumi, but they really matter more than they might appear at first glance for those of you who are watching Japan from afar. So the 16 national holidays are important, and the coming of age day, by the way, is it's coming up. It's our next national holiday. It's in January. We come back from Oshogatsu, from the end of the year on Monday, January 5th, and then the next weekend is the coming of age day. And as most of you know, that's when you can see it very clearly, because the kids who have become 18 years old, it used to be 20 years old, now wear kimono, and they get dressed up on the day that they're recognized as being adults, and they can vote and they can smoke. And I don't think they can smoke or drink alcohol, but it is a national holiday, and it arrives just before the Diet convenes. So it's a kind of a pause to shape consumption, travel, and politics, and even the tempo of decision making in Nagatacho. So it's a day to look forward to. So please put that on your calendar and watch the news that builds up around it and after it, because it'll be very insightful, I think, a useful lens to look through. And politically, we're heading into a period of relative calm on the surface. The country is already in shutdown mode. The ministries are quiet and companies are winding down, even though it's a little bit before Oshogatsu. Usually the companies shut down on the 28th or the 29th, but you can already feel that January 1st is just next week. And most people have kind of already shut down. I visited the Diet this last week. Many of the offices are already closed. This was on Friday, in fact. So positioning really remains very much underway, even though there's a lot of people that are taking their Oshogatsu breaks a little bit earlier. And once the calendar turns and the business year begins in early January, the jostling will resume quickly. From January 24th onward, when the Diet begins, the Diet has, the lower house has 6 intense weeks to move the budget, and then they pass it to the upper house. And it's not that they relax then, but if there are going to be fights, they'll probably surface in the upper house, and the lower house will have to make some negotiations to change it or modify it. So economically, Japan is in the middle of a structural transition that doesn't always get described honestly. It's no longer a country driven primarily by making things at home. Manufacturing remains important, especially in autos and high-end components, but much of Japan's real economic value today comes from services, tourism, finance, and intellectual property. Overseas investment is a huge part of that, and increasingly AI-related capital formation. Japan earns a great deal of its income not by exporting finished goods, but by owning assets, technology brands, and supply chains abroad, and repatriating those profits from back home. So this reality sits alongside a declining population and a GDP ranking that is under pressure from faster growing countries. So Japan is currently at number 3. It's going to fall to number 4 very quickly. India is going to take over it, and then it'll be Great Britain. So pretty quickly, Japan's ranking in GDP is going to be falling. And what matters is whether the policy choices being made now on AI, defense, labor, and fiscal strategy translate into durable productivity gains. Japan's productivity is one of the lowest of the G20 countries. So the per capita income generated by each individual person in Japan is much lower than, I mean, it's probably more ranked as 24th among the economic viable advanced countries. So geopolitically, the signals have been unmistaken that Japan faces Russia and China being a little bit more assertive around Japan and North Korea's continued provocations. But this really kind of indicates their acknowledgement of Japan's primary geopolitical positioning. So Japan occupies a huge portion of this space that China really wants to dominate. And so the practice of the Russian and the Chinese bombers kind of making exercises, rather than being threatening, it's kind of an acknowledgement that Japan really holds a pole position. And this, I guess you could call it intimidation. I certainly interpret it as intimidation. It hasn't really shaken Japan's confidence. Actually, Japan has moved more forward, more aggressively towards alliance building. The passed a budget that is predominantly defense related and making AI and surveillance more of a priority. And it focuses more on this alliance building, this wall of like-minded countries should China decide to move aggressively on Taiwan. So defense spending, nuclear energy, and even taboo topics like nuclear weapons would have been unthinkable just recently, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, are now becoming topics of conversation. That's why you saw this trial balloon about Japan having nuclear weapons. So whether one agrees with that direction or not, this shift is undeniable. It is happening right now. Finally, in terms of leadership, Prime Minister Takaichi ends the year in a stronger position than many had expected, and her approval rating remains really high. So the supplemental budget is popular. Her China stance polls well, the way she's kind of stiffened her back with that. She hasn't apologized. She hasn't retracted. And while the parliamentary math remains kind of delicate, she enters 2026 in a position that's difficult to challenge, at least until the budget is passed and the political calendar opens up again. So we close this year with Japan somewhat paused, but not idle. There's resting on the surface, but there's recalibration going forward. And I think we have a lot to look forward to in 2026. This is our last briefing this week. We'll be back next Sunday, though. It'll be cold. It'll be January, but we'll come back to you again and talk about what's going on in Japanese politics. And next week, I'd like to talk about what the generation of productivity is in Japan. We've talked about how the country here is earning money. Next week, I'd like to talk about how Japan is spending money and where it spends its money. But thank you very much for joining us throughout the year. 52 briefings, 255 episodes going strong. And I just think it's great that you've stuck with us and you continue to tune in. We appreciate it. We look forward to your questions and this dialogue that's always generated in the Q&A period that Maya artfully crafts for us. So Happy New Year to everybody. And back to you, Maya.
Thank you, Timothy. And yes, to everybody who joined us just now, thank you very much for joining, even though it is a little bit after we started the briefing this morning. You can always watch the replay after we finish, because the replay remains available on YouTube, also LinkedIn and Facebook as well. So, and remember, please, if you think that these briefings help you stay informed, Help us spread the word, share them
Yeah.
with your friends and family, colleagues, bosses even, so that they can join as well. Because there is a lot of news in Japanese, not so much in English. And even in Japanese, many of the things that Timothy mentions here are not reported. Because he actually sources the news directly from Nagata-cho. And yeah, thank you very much for being with us for this year. Now, moving on to the Q&A, the questions first. Well, today I'll start with Byron's questions because he was here very early this morning, or I believe it's early evening for him in the United States. So please allow me to get there and read them out. And from there, we'll move on to the next questions that were, and of course, comments that were shared with us during the briefing. So the first one comes as Mr. Nikai Toshihiro, then the LDP Secretary General, and Komeito were the interlocutors with PRC. Who has the stature to replace them? Unlike the US, why does Japan over-rely on bureaucrats and retired bureaucrats? Is there no one else with gravitas and stature? This is the first question, Timothy.
That's a great observation. Yeah, with the retirement and the kind of the change in Japanese politics that's gone on, yes, it's true that Mr. Nikai and Komeito were really kind of being the back channel to Beijing, and both of those are kind of now in the background. They're not really driving Japanese politics. But I think the really essential question here is, longevity, predictability, and personal relationships in Japan are directed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So you've got Japan hands there, you've got US hands, you've got China hands. And although there are a couple of personalities and even Komeito, the political party, that are leaning towards more friendship with China, it's all really pretty much reliant on the China hands that are in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And these guys are, they're world class. And it's not by accident. It reflects a structural feature of Japanese politics. Politics kind of moves with the winds, with the Japanese political sentiment, with the polls and things like that. And the bureaucracies remain firm and generally attract the brightest students from the universities of Japan, mostly from University of Tokyo. But this is the standard leaning of Japan. So it's not like the United States, I think. Although you mentioned Nikai and Komeito, I think the United States, since the State Department pretty much directs that, and they have their China hands too, they do lean a lot on personalities to drive that. But I think it's not dissimilar to the United States, to Japan, with the policy hands, the national hands that exist inside the bureaucracy really are the ones that are calling the shots. They're just not in the limelight. Whenever a news story comes up, politicians want to sign their names to it. They want to speak publicly about it. They want to say things that maybe the ministry has fed to them to kind of promote an issue or a negotiation. But most of it is driven by the State Department. And I think that it really diminishes domestic risk if these kind of discussions fail or they don't go forward. You can talk about, the blame was on that individual. But I think Japan's, it's a Confucius kind of feature, but it is one of the strengths. It's always been the strength, when people were talking about, Miti driving the Japanese economy and driving and dominating Japanese politics from, 25 or 30 years ago. It is the bureaucrats that were driving that change and keeping stability. So I think that's the same thing that can be said with China as well.
Right. If I may add something here, there is also a very pragmatic reason for, the, let's say, politicians relying on bureaucrats as well, because in Japan, lifetime employment is still a thing. And even though, the percentage of people who are employed in that manner is decreasing, has been decreasing, Well, the bureaucrats are still there, and many of them stay there. They work for the ministry that they are admitted to for years and years on end, like 20, 25, 30 years. And this is basically part of the social contract as well, of because the bureaucracy is an organization that also produces results here. And even though it is not an economic organization, they still work on the same principles as Japanese corporations when it comes to employment of the people there. And yeah, that's another reason, of course, for that. So, okay,
One other
yes.
side angle, Maya, if you don't mind me making this, it's a generalized statement, so forgive me for being kind of painting with a broad brush. But typically, these bureaucrats who have been working in the bureaucracy, they're honed with a different set of skills. And
Indeed.
frequently, the big companies come in, not the Japanese companies, the foreign companies come in, and they recruit these guys because they need somebody who knows the industry. They speak English. They speak, whatever the foreign language is, and they transition. They attract them out of the bureaucracy and into business. Almost universally, these have not been very successful for some reason. I think it's the skill set that is being developed as you finish school and you join the bureaucracy and you get trained and tuned into that. People who jump ship and join the companies, it's such a huge leap. And I think it's probably somewhat true in other bureaucracies too. You're a bureaucrat and then you come into a corporate position where performance and other metrics are completely different. It's just a very it's a really interesting concept to think about. But I just thought I'd point that out as well. It's just they're two very different worlds.
They are indeed, but to the point you made about bureaucrats working for foreign organizations in Japan and many of them failing, we also need to say there is a counterpoint there that the bureaucrats working for Japanese organizations are quite a lot as well.
It's a different
yes,
game, absolutely.
it's a different game, and those organizations continue to be successful. So they do work well when they work in, let's say, Japanese cultural environment, right? And probably there is something there when it comes to foreign companies as well. But anyway, so these are just observations based on what we have seen here over the years and what we have worked with. Now, yes, talking about China, and yes, Keizawa-san says, one could argue that the current state of Japan-China relations stems from China's tendency to depend on sycophantic Japanese lawmakers to bridge the gap.
Yeah.
Right. I just cannot comment on this really, but yes, well, maybe we can have another discussion on a different day. And continuing with the questions from Byron, the average Japanese youth is hardly violent. They are taught to be polite and deferential to elders. Yes, deferential to elders and society in general. Are they supposed to be the warriors of the new Japanese armed forces in the face of rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific? This is the question.
As everybody knows, Japan doesn't have an army. It's got a self-defense forces. The Constitution says that. So it doesn't have an army in a sense that we understand an army to be. But if the self-defense forces was an army, I think globally it would be number 6 or number 7 in terms of strength, or in terms of not revenue, in terms of economic, how much money it pulls in from the government. So right now, Japan is at 2% of GDP for its military structure. It is actually under the leadership of Ms. Takaichi. It's this 5-year plan, they've compressed it to 4. It's actually moving much quicker than that. I think at the end of the day, probably by this time next year, we will have calibrated that Japan is spending more like 3% on defense. But that's without an army. And Japanese kids are not trained to be soldiers. there's not that kind of drive in the traditional sense. So I don't think Japan is trying to turn its youth. There's been no discussion of that, of turning youth into warriors and doing push-ups and being aggressive and that sort of thing. Japan's defense strategy assumes several different things: deterrence over combat, technology over manpower, and alliances over unilateral action. And so the self-defense forces is being reshaped, not as a mass army, but as a highly professional, technologically sophisticated force. Missile defense, cyber operations, space surveillance, logistics, and interoperability with allies. I think that's the direction that Japan is going. It's not going to have a large military force.
Right, and I hope it's not going to, and there will be no need for that, because many people talk about war, and once again, as a woman, as a mother, as somebody who has grown up with movies about the Second World War, I don't think that people realize how much devastation war brings to everybody, every single person, every country. And the more people realize that, the better it is. Because I don't believe that people want to send their children to war to die, because that's what happens. And many have this, idea that modern wars are fought without, people being killed and so on and so on. And that's not the case. If you look at the example of Ukraine, the number of casualties there, it's just devastating. So let's hope that there is no need to actually get that the army and young people going to the front lines. All right. Okay, sorry. Then thank you, Evan, for your question as well. We're getting there. There is one more question from Byron here. The past 30 years have seen that while Japan borrows and spends increasing amounts, the GDP growth rate is pretty stagnant, and also many small and medium enterprises are very unhappy about lack of support from government. What new structural innovations are being contemplated to rectify that?
Wow. Byron.
Yes.
So, yes. Well, you're absolutely right. Japan has spent heavily for decades with disappointing growth, and the small and medium enterprises in particular are being left behind. This has been going on for 20 years. It's not a new thing. So what's changing now is not the size of spending, because there's a lot of spending going on, but where it is being targeted and how success is being defined. There's three structural shifts that are going on, I think, and they're important to point out. It's going from a stimulus to capacity building. In the past, it was public works. Let's build roads. Let's build bridges. Let's do infrastructure and ports, and short-term relief, so that people are not rioting. They're not being angry about the political party that's in power. And the current approach is emphasizing something quite different. And you can notice it, and we've talked about it through the briefing: AI infrastructure, semiconductor ecosystems, energy resilience, and defense adjustment in industrial capacity. These are long gestation investments. They take a long time, but that is where the money is going to now. Second, I think from protecting incumbents to enforcing productivity. So productivity is going down and down and down. The amount of productivity per Japanese worker is among the lowest of the G20 countries. So the wage-linked tax incentives are on the way out. Reduced tolerance for zombie firms, digitization of digitization mandates. This is how you're supposed to run your business, how you're supposed to run your bureaucracy, your different ministries. It's all pushing towards digitization. It takes a long time to do that. And consolidation in logistics, retail, and in manufacturing. The small and medium companies are really unhappy, but in many cases, that's because they're old, protected, and being protected by the government too. And that's being withdrawn. So that's going to hit the economy, but that's something that's being done to enforce a more forward-looking and a more sustained economy. And from a domestic demand to external income is a shift that is occurring now. We've talked about that. From overseas profits, Japan is increasingly reliant on that. Licensing and royalties, fiscal, financial services, and tourism as an export model. This just reflects a recognition that the population decline caps domestic growth. So we're not having enough people to support the manufacturing and the other industries. What can we do with the population that is in decline? These are the areas that the Japanese government has decided we need to focus on. And it's not a guaranteed success. It's a bit of an experiment that we're going through now, but it does represent a genuine departure from what we've experienced over the last 30 years. So it's a time to just, lock in, strap up, and follow what's going on, because we are in the middle of this transition, as Byron kind of points out very astutely. Japan, the Japanese economy is not the way it was in the last 20 or 30 years. It is in a rapid change, and much of the investment that's being made, it's huge investment, but it's on a long-term growth strategy.
Right, and I believe that the country is learning how to support small and medium-sized businesses, as we're talking about it, because until very recently, the policies that were created in Kasumigaseki, they supported the big corporations here because they carried the economy, right? Their exports and everything. But they have realized that eventually the country needs to change policies and provide support for the smaller ones. And
Yeah.
I believe that maybe in several years we are going to see the results. Of course, it's going to take that long, if not longer. So I believe that everybody needs to be patient with that. But that's how things happen here in this country. Okay, thank you for this. And so we've got a comment from Greg saying, I saw a garish prediction that the yen will weaken to 164 yen per dollar in 2026. So what is your outlook, Timothy?
Yeah, I don't think they'll allow that to happen. I think that would be just intolerable. And before it moved in that position, the Japanese Ministry of Finance, the Bank of Japan, moves very aggressively. And I think the coordination with the United States too, there's a lot of give and take there. I think having a strong Japanese economy supports, America's interests, and America is, it's the big dog in the region, and it has a lot of assets it wants to protect. Plus, it feels it has a responsibility to keep China at bay and to protect Taiwan. So I don't foresee that. It is a garish prediction, Greg. I don't know if I subscribe to it.
All right, thank you for that. And yes, we've got a question from Manabe-san. The question is, what are the government's measures to address the digital deficit?
The digital deficit is, I wish they were doing more to it or more with it. There seems to be something of a reluctance. I mean, this digital transformation, it is actually sucking in a lot of money. There's a lot of interest in developing digital transformation. There are a lot of, even on this, in this briefing in our audience, there are a lot of people that are really focused on digital transformation. You mentioned Evan. I guess Evan has a question or something, but
Yes,
there are a lot of there are a lot of companies that are really driving this digital transformation. You have to enhance Japanese individual productivity. The only way to do that, if you're not going to have more kids and have more population, is you need to enable each individual to be more productive than they can be. AI is going to be doing that, and this transformation of, rather than, relying on, writing emails and things like that. There's a lot of businesses. There's a lot of work that can be done by reliance on AI models and focusing human potential in different areas. So that's the kind of phase that we're going in. I think it feels like Japan is going in that direction, kicking and screaming, and not wanting to be too far distant from what it traditionally feels is its strengths. So there's a transformation that's going on with the younger people as well.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that answer and the question as well. And the next one is from Chris Olson. Please forgive me if I mispronounce your family name.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. The question is, Who are the primary buyers of Japanese drones and other military hardware?
That's a good one. So I think Japan is actually developing the drones now. It's actually incorporating much of the technology from Ukraine, from Israel, to build a product that other countries are going to want. So I'm not sure if it's so much in an export model now. They're trying to develop that for internal use and then as an export vehicle as well. With regard to ships and destroyers, yes, it has moved into the export model. There are a lot of countries that are purchasing the shipping capabilities, but I think to have a drone that is really something of world class value, it has to kind of go through the crucible of being in a war scenario. That's where it really gets tested. And I think for Japan, moving into the drone area, it probably needs just a little bit more time, a little bit more testing. But I think there are a lot of, I mean, it's just like automobiles. If you are in a volatile region, you want to have the best equipment, the best defensive capabilities and offensive capabilities, in fact, if you're facing an enemy. And so sometimes it's not money that is the deciding factor, it's the technology. So Japan wants to be at the top of the heap and produce autonomous vehicles that surpass what is being produced in Israel or the United States, that sort of thing. So I think we're just on the cusp of that, the emergence of the Japanese military industrial complex. It's emerging. It's getting a lot of support from the Japanese government, from this current prime minister, but I don't think it's quite there yet.
Right. Okay. Moving on to Evan's comments here and then on to Hiroko-san's ones. So we've got this. Okay, a bit of correction from Evan. He says Japan's GDP is currently number 5. India has overtaken it. In the next 12 to 24 months, it is predicted to sink to number 6 as the UK surpasses it. Japan is the poorest country in the G7. In terms of per capita GDP, Japan is 24th globally, which is lower than the state of Mississippi. And 75% of GDP comes from the services sector, which also has the lowest per hour productivity rate in the G7. This is one reason why the investment in digitalization and AI is a priority.
Yeah.
Thank you, Evan. Even though I would argue, that over digitalization here is going to, to be good for productivity. Because the Japanese, we know what happens when the Japanese, start doing something. It takes them forever to just gain momentum. But once they gain momentum, they go to the other extreme. And then the other extreme is not very good either. So let's see what happens. So, but yes, they have been struggling indeed for years. I believe that basically, what do you call that? Well, the wave of wanting to improve productivity in the service sector started over 10 years ago. And it's being difficult, really, for, once again, for Kasumi Gaseki to wrap their heads around it, how to do it. And eventually, I believe that it's going to be the service sector, the private sector, that will lead in this direction. Timothy, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's okay. Evan's comment is really pretty insightful. Tokyo alone produces about 20% of the entire economic value of this country. So for people who visit and they visit Tokyo, 20%, that's huge, but Tokyo is not all of Japan. And you see a lot of cars, you see a lot of wealth and stuff like that. Evan's comment about the per capita GDP, that means how much value each individual person generates in this country, is lower than the economic value that's produced by each person who lives in Mississippi. Mississippi is, I think, the poorest state of the United States. And Japan's per capita generation of value is less than that. That is the point of that. So although there's wealth that's being generated, there's a lot of flashiness, there's a lot of glitz in Tokyo, that doesn't represent all of Japan. And I think his comment is Japan needs to be much higher in productivity. And the only way to achieve that, I think we've gone around and around about that, is to embed each individual with more technical prowess and to digitize and rely on AI to do those things that you don't need a human to do, and you just have the humans doing the things that humans are best at. And we're not there yet. And like you said, Maya, it seems like it takes a long time for them. It's for everything. It's like digital cash. It took such a long time. I mean, Japan was purchasing things, automobiles, in fact, with cash, right? Not too long ago. And now that digitization, them using digital money, you see it all the time now. And it's really overtaken the use of cash, at least in Tokyo. But yeah, these things just take a long time. And it's a funny economy. It's a funny culture here. There are a lot of things that are just quirky about it. And some of it drives us crazy, and some of it just makes us fall in love with, being here. But it's just a fascinating place. And I think that's why our audience has grown. There are so many people that are interested in Japan, and they really want to know how it clicks and why it works, and it shouldn't work, and it does, but how long can this continue? That kind of thing, the kind of question that Evan brought up.
Right. Okay. And moving on to Hiroko-san's comments and questions. She says recently Japanese politicians, including Koichi Haniuda, have visited Taiwan. What is the purpose of their visit? If it is sending a diplomatic signal to China, I don't think it is the best timing. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Mr. Hagiuda visiting. He visited the last week when we were briefing. He was already in Taiwan. He was there for 2 days. Since then, Kono Taro has been in Taiwan for 3 days. So yes, this is signaling. This is, without Mr. Nikai, without Komeito kind of driving that relationship with China, I think contrary to that, I think the Japanese people are kind of leaning more towards Taiwan now. And so I think this is becoming something of a trend, perhaps, as a deterrence model, that Japanese politicians are being visibly seen as visiting. And Mr. Hagiuda, in fact, visited with the president of Taiwan as well. So these things are being closely followed and read in Beijing. But I think, yes, there's this cultural clash. Japan relies on China. Japan and China should be close friends. They shouldn't have this animosity. But I don't think the animosity is being generated by Japan, if you allow me to say so. But China is just hell-bent on having, it's the big dog in the neighborhood, and it doesn't want to be challenged. And if it wants to move on Taiwan, it feels like Taiwan belongs to it, and it has every right to do that. And it's been very patient in allowing the Taiwanese to pretend like they're an independent country. And in fact, not everybody treats Taiwan as an independent country out of respect, maybe respect, or out of some sort of sense that doing so is going to push China to move more aggressively. So it's just a kind of status quo. And I think most people hope that status quo will be preserved, and the urge of China to reunite, from their perspective, Taiwan with the main country. If that just doesn't happen and we maintain status quo in the region, everybody will be that much better off. But who knows how it's going to roll out.
Well, my personal belief is that all that rhetoric coming from China is mostly for domestic consumption within China. But we'll see. Of course, I know that many people disagree on this, which is also fine. And we'll continue watching the developments here. And because, once again, we're getting closer to the topic of military conflict, I want to read this comment from Agnieszka. She says, coming from Poland, very close to Ukraine, I agree with you. I don't think many people appreciate the heaviness of war.
Yeah.
And Yes, so, and it's always easy, when you're somewhere far away from the conflict, it's very easy to say, let's fight, right? Because you know that
Yeah.
that war is never going to affect your family or your loved ones. So, for this reason, once again, I always tell people who are, ideologically, yeah, you can support this and that, but please don't go for war. Yes, and I've got Diana with me here. Thank you very much, Diana, for watching. And
Diana in Sydney.
yes, so, and I think that we women can really create a united front here. All right, and then it looks like we have actually, yes, we have gone through the questions. And Timothy, I know that you can breathe a sigh of relief. I know that there were some noises today. I want to show you the person, not the person,
The
somebody.
culprit. Oh, there you
The
go.
culprit, yes, here we go. He has been with me the whole time and just pushing things off the desk. Okay, so forgive him for that. But
No, that's okay. We could hear you strangling him, or maybe the other way around.
and yeah, he survived even though. Anyway, so okay, so thank you very much for watching. Timothy, thank you very much for being with us for the last briefing for this year.
Happy
And
New Year, Maya.
everybody, thank you. The same to you, of course. And everybody, Happy New Year. Remember that we're going to have a movie night on January 20th. That's Tuesday. We're going to talk or give you more details as we get closer. But if you think that you can make it, to Tokyo, or you'll be in Tokyo on that day, just put it on your calendar. That's movie night after 6 o'clock on the 20th of January. So thank you very much indeed. Happy New Year, and we'll see you next Sunday.